Today in Minecraft, I've decided to spend my time building something from Create Addon. I am not professional in that, so don't scoff me, please. While doing that, I'll also be reading some of the creepiest and most disturbing stories I can find on Reddit. So, without wasting any more time, let's jump right into it. The first story I'm going to share with you today comes from the subreddit r/nosleep, written by a user named Saad, and it's about a tiny beetle that only I could see. A couple of years ago, I went through an incredibly rough patch in my life. I had just broken up with my fiancée after being together for 8 long years, and at the same time, I was moving to South Dakota for a new job opportunity that seemed really promising. Everything around me felt like it was falling apart all at once, and I barely had a moment to catch my breath or even think clearly about what I should do next. For 2 weeks, I stayed at the house of a friend I'd known since college while I looked for a place of my own to live. It felt strange to finally slow down enough to actually pay attention to where my life was heading. For years, I hadn't taken a single vacation, and suddenly, my whole month was wide open with absolutely nothing scheduled. I started taking long walks, reconnecting with people I hadn't spoken to in ages, and listening again to music that used to mean something to me. It honestly felt like I was walking through someone else's life in a daze. But maybe that's just what it feels like when you finally let out a breath you've been holding for years. It was a weird and confusing time, but looking back, it ended up changing me in ways I never expected. I often walked along the river near my friend's place. Around that time, I had also started listening to audiobooks, and I would deliberately take the long way back home just so I could keep listening to the story a little longer. There's something deeply comforting about hearing a story told out loud. It reminds a lot of people of childhood, and for me, it's one of the coziest feelings in the world. One day, while I was crouched down tying my shoelaces, I caught a strange, sharp smell in the air. I took off my headphones and tried to listen carefully to the sound of the river flowing nearby, but there was something else mixed in with it. A faint, raspy, almost choking noise. Curious, I stepped off the path to investigate, and that's when I saw it. A young deer lying half in the water, its front half weakly paddling against the muddy bank as if it were begging for help. Its whole ribcage was covered in dozens of small, round wounds, each about the size of a dime, and I could actually see something moving underneath its skin. It was clearly dying. I moved closer, trying to figure out what could have done this to it. The poor thing wasn't skinny or starved. It looked like it had been physically attacked somehow. I'd never seen a parasite or disease that could cause damage like that. Then, the wheezing turned into actual screams, which slowly faded until the deer couldn't make a sound anymore. All it could do was open its mouth in silence. I stared into its eyes, and they seemed to be searching mine. Not for comfort, but for something deeper. That look filled me with a kind of terror I'd never known before. Losing a job or ending a relationship hurts. Sure, but those are human problems. What I saw in that deer's eyes reminded me that there's a much older, more primal kind of fear, one that comes from knowing something is literally eating you alive from the inside out. When it finally took its last breath, I felt a cold shiver run through my whole body, like I just witnessed something I wasn't supposed to see. The shadows around me seemed darker than before, and I felt that same creeping dread the deer must have felt. Dozens of open, nickel-sized wounds stained the water red with blood. I left the spot feeling deeply unsettled. I thought maybe I should call someone. After all, a dead or dying animal in the river could be a public health concern. But more than that, I didn't know how to process what I'd just seen. Was I supposed to feel horrified? Scared? Grateful that it wasn't me? I got back on the path and put my headphones back in, letting the goosebumps on my arms take over as I tried to shake off the heavy feeling in my chest. But just as I lifted my phone to press play on my audiobook again, I noticed a tiny gray speck on my thumb. It looked like a very small beetle. I tried to brush it off with my index finger, but my finger went right through it, as if it weren't really there, and the beetle stayed exactly where it was. I shook my hand hard a few times and kept walking, deciding not to think about it anymore. Aside from that odd moment, the rest of my day was totally normal. I ate a chicken salad sandwich, replied to some emails, and browsed apartment listings online. I even found one place that looked really promising. I just needed a bit more time to decide. Luckily, time was the one thing I had plenty of right then. My friends were all very understanding. That night, as I stood in the bathroom getting ready for bed, I remember looking at myself in the mirror. Maybe my eyes looked a little darker than usual, and my skin seemed a bit looser around my cheeks. People say you never look exactly the same from one day to the next. Aging changes you slowly, in tiny ways you don't always notice. As I bent over to rinse my mouth out, I felt a slight tickling sensation on my right palm. When I looked down, there it was again. The same little gray beetle crawling lazily across my skin. I turned on the faucet and held my hand under a stream of water, but the beetle didn't move or wash away. I flipped my hand over, shook it, turned the water hotter, but no matter what I did, the water just passed right through the beetle like it was made of smoke. I could see it perfectly clearly with my own eyes, yet it had no physical presence at all. I decided to ignore it. After all, I still had an audiobook to finish, and I had an apartment viewing scheduled for the next morning. I had real responsibilities and places to be. I couldn't afford to get hung up on something so small and strange that didn't seem to affect anything important. Bigger things were waiting for me, and obsessing over a bug on my hand wouldn't solve them. So I went to bed, trying my best to tune out the faint tingling feeling on my palm. The next morning, I'd completely forgotten about it. While I was in the shower shaving, I noticed a thin red line across my cheek, barely more than a scratch. At first, I thought I must have nicked myself, but when I checked more closely, my shave had been flawless. Then I looked at my hand and saw it. A tiny red mark on the back of my thumb, no bigger than the tip of a pin, with a small bead of blood slowly welling up and starting to clot. And right next to it, the same gray beetle was perched there, feeding gently, like a gazelle sipping from a watering hole. Now, I've never really been scared of bugs. In fact, I even ate a worm once when I was a kid, but this one was starting to freak me out. I washed my hands 3 times in a row, used more and more soap each time, scrubbed with a sponge until my skin felt raw, tried dish soap, and even used some weird lotion I found by the bathtub, but nothing worked. The beetle stayed put, calmly probing the little wound with what looked like its mouth parts. Eventually, I just gave up and covered the whole area with a bandage. Took the beetle a while to adjust. It tried to crawl under the edges of the adhesive, but the bandage held tight. If it had kept trying, it probably would have gotten underneath eventually, but instead, it just moved a little and bit me again in a new spot. Now there was another tiny wound, barely visible but definitely real. I told myself it couldn't possibly be real. After all, if it didn't react to water, soap, or pressure, if it couldn't be photographed, if it passed right through solid objects, then it couldn't actually exist in the physical world. Real things get washed away. Real beetles can be squished or drowned. Real stuff shows up on camera. This thing didn't appear on my phone screen at all. Logically, it just couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of hallucination or trick of the light. Convinced it was all in my head, I finished getting ready. I put on my nicest clothes, grabbed my car keys, checked my calendar, and headed out. I didn't feel any itching or biting, so I figured I was fine. I had serious things to deal with, and this phantom bug wasn't one of them. For a couple of hours, everything seemed normal. I drove around town, checked out the apartment, and had a long talk with my future boss about my move. He was really flexible. He said he'd give me another couple of weeks as long as I kept him updated and let him know the second I was ready to sign paperwork. The job was basically mine, though signing official documents always makes me a little nervous. Later that day, I met up with a guy to look at the apartment. I showed up dressed professionally, hoping to make a good impression. But when we shook hands, I saw his eyes flick down to his fingers, and there was a tiny smear of blood on his fingertip. He touched one of my wounds without realizing it. He looked up at me with pure disgust on his face, like I just insulted him personally. He quickly masked it, but for just a split second, I saw exactly what he was thinking. We both apologized repeatedly, but I could tell he was now worried he might catch some kind of disease from me. He rushed inside to wash his hands, and I knew right then that I'd lost the apartment. There was no coming back from that. Sure enough, I didn't get the place. On my way back to the car, I was furious. I looked down at my hand and saw the beetle again, sitting right on top of a fresh pinprick wound. In a fit of rage, I slammed my hand against the dashboard over and over, But when I turned it back over, the beetle was still there, untouched. I even bit my own skin, spat, scratched, clawed, but nothing worked. At my most desperate, I used my car keys to scrape at my skin like I was trying to scratch off a lottery ticket. All that did was give me more cuts. The beetle didn't seem to care at all. This was beyond frustrating. Not only was it tormenting me personally, but it was actively ruining my real-life plans. When my friend asked how the apartment search was going, all my stress came pouring out. We agreed I could stay another week before moving to a motel. The conversation sounded polite and calm, but I could feel his patience wearing thin. It reminded me of how so many relationships in my life had ended. Not with yelling or tears, but with quiet, rehearsed conversations in public places meant to avoid drama. Even my 8-year relationship had ended that way. A carefully timed "we need to talk" over coffee. But this beetle, this impossible, invisible beetle, was pushing me closer and closer to the edge of sanity. Since I couldn't photograph it, I tried to draw it instead. I even used a magnifying glass to study it more closely, though I'm terrible at drawing. Still, I got enough detail to recognize it from pictures online. I spent hours scrolling through insect photos, hoping to find a match. I never found an exact copy, but the closest thing I could describe was a stocky darkling beetle with a pale gray shell and short legs. All the while, it kept feeding on the back of my hand, and I could clearly feel its tiny legs moving as it hopped from one scab to another, poking at them like it was testing which one tasted best. That night, as I got ready for bed, my hand felt warm. Not from the beetle itself, but from all the scratching and irritation. It even looked swollen from a distance. I realized that if this kept getting worse, I'd probably need to see a doctor. But that thought led me down a dark path I didn't want to go down. As I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about the deer's eyes. Those empty, black pools that didn't seem to see me as a person, just as part of the world around it. Maybe the deer couldn't tell if I was there to help or to hurt. Maybe it decided I was neither. Maybe those awful cries were a warning. Stay away, run. I never really fell asleep that night, but I jolted upright suddenly, as if something had yanked me awake. This time, I felt a sharp bite, higher up, near my wrist. I turned on the light and saw that the beetle had grown noticeably larger, maybe by 1/8 of an inch, and there was a new, slightly bigger bite mark above my hand. It was already red and itchy. At that point, I'd had enough. I was completely, utterly done. I swore I'd get rid of it, even if I had to cut off my own hand. I went to the kitchen, grabbed a bucket, filled it with ice from the freezer, and added cold water. As I was doing that, my friend came out of his room, hair messy and sleep mask crooked on his forehead. "What are you doing?" he asked. "I'm almost done," I said. "Okay. But what are you doing?" I sighed and bit my lip. There was no way around it. I was about to sound completely insane. I turned to him and held out my hand. "Do you see this?" "Yeah," he said. "What do you see?" He leaned in closer. There was no way he could miss it. The beetle was right there in plain sight. "Looks like a rash. Are you okay?" "It's not a rash. It's not a scratch. I don't even know what it is. You should get that checked out." I rolled my eyes as he shuffled back to his room. I plunged my hand into the icy water, but the beetle just calmly crawled up my arm, found a warmer spot, and bit me again. And this time, I definitely felt it. Over the next few days, the beetle consumed my every thought. Everything else faded into the background. I'd find small bloodstains on my shirt near my wrist and fly into a blind rage. At one point, I noticed it seemed to avoid biting areas that were covered up, so I wrapped my entire hand tightly in duct tape. But the persistent little monster just crawled up my arm, found bare skin, and bit me somewhere else. I tried everything I could think of. I bought bug spray from a garden store. I used pool cleaner. I even tied a belt around my upper arm to cut off blood flow. But that just hurt me more without stopping the beetle. No matter what I did, it always found a way. It would move, bite, and keep feeding. After a couple of days, it had grown so big it covered the nail of my pinky finger. That same day, I moved out of my friend's house and checked into a cheap motel. I went to see a doctor, but I didn't mention the beetle. I just showed him the wounds on my arm. He prescribed eczema cream, told me to eat more fiber, and said there wasn't much else he could do. All my lab tests came back normal. He suggested an antifungal ointment, but only after the wounds scabbed over. I started having sudden bursts of uncontrollable anger. I'd be fine 1 minute, then feel that familiar sting, and the next thing I knew, I'd be slamming my hand into walls or pounding my arm like a drum. All I got for it was bruises and more cuts, and the beetle was still there. It haunted my sleep too. I could feel it crawling around, hunting for spots where my skin was soft and easy to pierce. Once, when it bit the inside of my elbow, I let out a horrible guttural groan, the kind of sound that reminded me instantly of the dying deer. Maybe it had been searching for a way out too. Maybe it tried washing itself in the river, hoping the water would cleanse it. Was that going to be my fate? To die from my own self-inflicted wounds while this thing slowly ate me from the inside? Staying focused became nearly impossible. I was only sleeping 2 or 3 hours a night, and I even nodded off while driving. I'd moved to a motel near the highway, but the Wi-Fi was spotty, and I couldn't find a new place to live. I'd sit at my laptop for hours and get nowhere. Meanwhile, my money was running out, and my future employer kept asking questions I couldn't answer. I kept one browser tab open all the time, constantly searching for any wild idea that might work. Poison, radiation, X-rays, sonic frequencies. But the problem was, without knowing exactly what this thing was, I couldn't test whether any treatment would actually kill it. And I couldn't show it to anyone. Words alone just made it sound like a boring gray beetle. Then I had an idea. It was gruesome, but it might work. I had a cigar cutter, a gift from a friend's wedding the year before. I'd never used it. I don't even like cigars. But I'd kept it because it looked cool, like a tiny guillotine. I'd noticed that if I pricked myself with a needle, the beetle would sometimes move toward the fresh wound. So, bit by bit, I managed to lure it all the way to the tip of my ring finger. I placed the very end of my fingertip into the cutter and slammed it down hard. It wasn't as dramatic as it sounds, just painful. We're talking about a small piece of skin at the very tip of my finger. The beetle fell off onto the floor. I stepped back, holding my bleeding finger up in triumph. Then it flew toward me. Turns out the damn thing had wings. I tried to swat it, but my hand passed right through it. I ran out the door, but it phased through the wood like it wasn't there. I jumped in my car and drove off, only to watch it crawl slowly out of the dashboard and land back on my still bleeding hand. When it bit into a nerve, I had to pull over. I was in the middle of nowhere, and I just stood there screaming for a full minute. My voice probably carried for miles. I drove aimlessly, numb from pain. If all that effort only slowed it down a little, I was doomed to wear myself out. There had to be another way, anything. For a few days, I experimented with different strategies. I changed my diet, thinking that if it fed on my body, maybe altering what I ate would poison it. I tried all kinds of weird food combos, but nothing helped. If anything, eating more fiber, like the doctor suggested, seemed to make it stronger. A couple of days later, the beetle was big enough to cover my ring fingernail. I could clearly see its legs moving and its mouth parts chewing as it dug deeper into my flesh. The wounds started to look just like the ones on the deer, round, deep, and hollow. When you're sleep-deprived, days start to blur together. I stopped answering emails and calls. Instead, I'd just sit in my motel room, waiting for housekeeping to change the bloody sheets. I started wrapping my arm in a towel at night, but the wounds got so bad the blood soaked through. I was exhausted, deeply, soul-crushingly tired, and it showed. Looking in the mirror felt like staring at a stranger. I stopped picking up when my future employer called. I ignored texts from family and friends. Eventually, I just turned my phone off completely. They couldn't help me, and they'd never understand. How could they? I tried recording a video of the beetle biting me, hoping to capture proof. After hours of trying, I finally got it, but the footage looked strange. It didn't show a typical bite. Instead, it looked like my skin was sucking inward and then bursting open, like I'd taken a deep breath and something popped when I exhaled. The video didn't prove anything useful. I thought about buying a microscope or a macro lens, but what would be the point? I'd already tried everything: electricity, pepper spray, fire, acid. I even considered chopping off my finger midair, but the beetle could fly. It was too fast. That would have been pointless. I made long lists of possible solutions and crossed every single one off. All the while, I'd feel another sting on my arm, and frustration would boil up inside me with nowhere to go. The truth was, this thing wasn't leaving. It would keep feeding, growing. Nothing I did mattered. I cried and scratched at my own skin in panic, while the beetle calmly kept eating. People probably thought I'd been in an accident. Some of my wounds were so bad I needed bandages. The clerk at the drugstore recognized me by now. One day, I turned on my phone to watch the video I'd recorded, and it rang. It was my future employer. He'd left about a dozen missed calls. On impulse, I answered. "Hey," he said. "Glad I reached you. We were starting to worry." "Yeah, sorry," I croaked. "I've been really sick." "You're sick?" "Yeah, it's been pretty bad." I held up my hand. The beetle was crawling over my bandages, looking for its next meal. "We've been waiting to hear from you," he said. "We weren't sure if you were still coming." "I'm not sure either. Sorry." It just slipped out, but I couldn't take it back. The beetle clamped down hard, sending a fresh wave of pain up my arm. I shivered. It was now the size of my thumbnail. But size didn't matter. It hurt when it was small. It would hurt when it was big. "I've been dealing with something," I said. "I don't think I'll get better anytime soon." "Is it that serious?" "I don't know. Maybe." The beetle latched onto the wound, gripping the edges with its legs. Like that ever helped me get rid of it. "You're not sure if it's serious?" "I guess it is." I yawned. I couldn't stop it. I was drained. I turned my hand this way and that, watching the beetle cling on like it owned me. "I'll be honest," he said. "We expected you days ago. This doesn't look good." "I might be dying." "You might be. How can you not know?" "I have no idea. It's been eating me for weeks." I meant the whole situation, but when I looked at the beetle, I realized how literal that sounded. Eating me for weeks. I hadn't meant it as a joke. But the second I understood the irony, I burst out laughing. Loud, broken, almost maniacal laughter. I don't know when he hung up, but I didn't care. I laughed until I couldn't breathe, tears streaming down my face. Then the laughter turned into sobbing, and I collapsed on the floor like a child. I lay there for hours, watching the beetle take bite after bite after bite. After a while, it almost became mesmerizing, and you detach enough that the pain doesn't feel like yours anymore. It's not your hand. It belongs to him. From that moment on, I truly stopped caring. I stayed in my motel room, watching the beetle roam my arm, searching for soft spots. In certain lighting, it almost looked beautiful. Not quite light gray, but more like the muted blue-gray of asphalt, similar to those whimsical sunflowers they sell at garden centers. I'd lie there, waiting for a brilliant idea to strike. I'd keep my headphones on and walk for miles, forgetting to even play anything. I just didn't want to hear myself groan every time it bit me. It had stopped growing wider and had started getting longer and segmented. It was nearly as big as my thumb. I didn't care, but the bites were getting harder to ignore. I developed a daily routine. Clean my wounds, take iron pills, wear baggy clothes to hide the damage. Thankfully, the motel was cheap. At night, instead of sleeping, I swung between helpless rage and total despair. I felt sorry for myself, listing all the things I wanted to do. If only I could get rid of this cursed thing. All the while, it just kept biting, chewing, swallowing, repeating. One night, I woke up to a strange rhythmic tapping sound. I couldn't tell where it was coming from, until I turned on the light and realized I was shaking and my body was knocking against the floor. I rushed to the bathroom. My thoughts raced in every direction, but they all led to the same terrifying conclusion. I was dying. I looked in the mirror and saw my dark, hollow eyes, and it was like facing that deer by the river all over again. It had known it was going to die. Now, so did I. The pain got worse. Big, round wounds appeared inches apart. Some large, some small, some with strips of skin missing. If I tried to block the beetle with my other hand, I could see the tip of its shell sticking out the back of my hand. It looked so real, yet everything still passed right through it. I hadn't even realized I'd given up. It just hit me. I had no ideas left, no options. I could go back to the doctor and get my wounds treated, but what would be the point? Sooner or later, there'd be too many to count. I could delay the end, but to what end? Would I end up throwing myself into a river too? I started listening to my audiobook again. I walked for so long I lost track of time. I barely noticed the shivers anymore. It just felt good to finish something. At the end of one of those walks, I sat on a park bench. By now, I could feel every single bite. It happened so often it looked like I had hiccups. My whole body jerked with each one. I put on my headphones and dialed a number I hadn't called in weeks. My ex-fiancée. We'd promised to stay friends after our painful breakup, but we hadn't spoken in a while. She answered quickly and waited for me to speak first. Hey, you okay? Not bad. You? I looked down at my hand, watching the segmented creature scuttle around, looking for the perfect angle to bite. We talked about this, I said, avoiding her question. But why did we break up? I mean, it was 8 years. Weren't we just stuck? Spinning our wheels. She sighed. We weren't making progress. With your career, my studies. I nodded. I'd heard it before. Felt like ancient history. But is that really such a big deal? I asked. Jobs? School? Yeah, it matters, but for how long? Until retirement? That's decades away. But jobs end. Classes finish. We could still be together. She was quiet for a moment. I don't think we can. We sat in silence, letting the distance between us grow even wider. After that call, I truly gave up. I bought a huge bag of gooseberries. Their high fiber content seemed to energize the beetle, so I figured I might as well enjoy a good meal while I could. I was starting to accept that I wouldn't survive this. My arm looked like a battlefield. Wounds stretched all the way to my shoulder blade. The beetle moved so fast between feeding spots I couldn't keep up. Sometimes, if it really wanted a specific place, it would zip from point to point in silent bursts of wing beats. The fiber really sped things up. The beetle became ravenous. It stopped taking occasional bites and started drilling into one spot on my shoulder, piercing nerves, muscle, tissue, until the pain was so intense I couldn't think. I ended up on the motel floor, screaming, bleeding all over the carpet. Someone must have called the police. I vaguely remember a door opening and someone shouting at me. Meanwhile, I watched this creature, now the size of my hand, darting over me, clamping down and twisting its body like a shark doing a death roll. Someone yelled, "We need an ambulance." The beetle was literally frothing at the mouth, some kind of anticoagulant. My wounds wouldn't clot, and I could feel a strange coldness spreading through my veins. Colors looked sharper, brighter. The pain didn't vanish like with anesthesia, it just faded like I'd forgotten what pain even felt like. I felt empty, numb, like nothing could touch me. The only problem was I couldn't move. Someone put on gloves and pulled me out. Another person tried to bandage my wounds. There were flashing lights and loud voices. And the whole time, the beetle kept biting me, right in front of everyone. One officer dropped me the second he saw a fresh wound burst open. I can't imagine what he thought I had. I drifted in and out of consciousness. Voices sounded distorted. The sky looked alien. They strapped me to a gurney, and I felt like I was already dead. In the ambulance, the beetle settled on my stomach and kept tearing into me, curled up like a pet, now big enough to wrap around my whole arm. The bites felt distant, but I watched huge chunks of flesh disappear into its mouth. I locked eyes with one of the paramedics and realized I was making a sound. Every time it bit, I let out an involuntary bark, just like that deer by the river. For the first time in forever, I saw myself reflected in someone else's eyes. We were both terrified. I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't form. I tried to breathe, but my lungs didn't respond. I was shutting down. Little lights in my mind flickered out one by one with every bite. I was dying, and part of me just knew it even if I couldn't feel it clearly. I don't know where my thoughts ended and something else began, but I remember swirling colors, strange voices, streaks of light, maybe street lamps, skies with unfamiliar moons, people speaking languages I didn't know. Flashes of memories I never lived, eating ice cream, soaking in a fragrant bath. Then one final bite hit a nerve in my neck and everything went black. There were brief moments of awareness afterward, like a lamp swinging in my mind. 1 second, I was being wheeled into the ER. Next, someone was checking my pulse. The beetle was curled on my lap in a spiral. Had it stopped feeding? The next time I opened my eyes, it was dark. Machines beeped. Wires snaked across my body. The creature on my stomach looked different. It had coiled into a ball, head and tail fused together. It rose and fell gently with my shallow breaths. No pain, no biting. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling. The colors had dulled. But when I looked closely, I saw tiny sparkles in my vision, like stars. Maybe it was just random brain signals keeping my senses active, but to me, it looked like silver glitter dancing above me, and I was glad to see it. Felt like a blink. But then it was morning. People came and went, checking on me. Someone opened the blinds. The creature now had pale blue mold spreading across its shell. Then it cracked open. I saw movement. Tiny beings emerged from the thing that had been eating me, breaking apart like a chrysalis. At first, they looked like praying mantises, but then I saw their wings. They stretched them out one by one, testing them. There were about 7 of them, small creatures with red, white, and black wings, covered in fine gray hairs. Butterflies. They didn't stick around. They preened themselves and flew straight through the window pane into the world outside. In the days that followed, doctors searched for answers. Some thought it was a flesh-eating bacteria, but the symptoms didn't match any known disease. Once it was clear whatever had infected me was gone, they focused on helping me recover. In a strange way, I think giving up saved me. If I hadn't eaten all that fiber, the beetle might have killed me slowly through blood loss and infection. By speeding up the process, it got what it needed before it could finish me off. By the time I left the hospital, I had a journal full of question marks and a body covered in scars. My follow-up appointment was just to monitor healing. They had no way to prevent it from happening again, since they never figured out what it was. Looking back now, I feel like I should be angry. I should curse God for creating something so cruel and incomprehensible. I know I'm supposed to feel that way, but at the end of the day, I'm just grateful to be alive. I can acknowledge that terrible things happen, and still be thankful for simple joys I used to take for granted. This helped me see beyond job applications, emails, and resumes. There are other careers, other loves, other paths. My life isn't perfect today, but it didn't end with one big disaster. Not from a move, a breakup, or a beetle. Life goes on, and sometimes that's enough. Sometimes on my way home, I take the long route. I start an audiobook, and if I look closely into the distant fields, I can see something fluttering from bush to bush, piercing ripe red berries and drinking their juice. Small, pale butterflies with red, white, and black wings visible only to me. Well, folks, I honestly didn't expect the original poster to survive that one. In my head, I was thinking, yep, they're done for. But I never imagined Eat More Fiber would be the solution to the whole nightmare. Huge credit to Saturn Dead. I've read maybe 5 to 8 of their stories, and they're all incredibly gripping. Anyway, let's move on to the next tale. Today's second story also comes from our /NoSleep, written by user Unalloyed St. Trina. It's called, There is a Predator Only the Deaf Can Hear Approaching. They have taken everything from me. Henry and I were born 6 weeks early. Mom says we came out looking like a pair of grapes. Our lips and skin tinted a dull purple, and she could almost hold both of us in one hand. It's a strangely gentle way to describe 2 premature babies fighting for every breath. But that's just Mom's style. To be blunt, Henry and I entered the world barely alive. We couldn't breathe on our own, not even with the machines helping us in the NICU. Thin tubes, no thicker than coffee stirrers, pushed tiny puffs of air into our throats to ease the strain on our immature lungs, giving them time to grow. For a little while, it seemed like we'd make it. We'd both survive. We'd both be normal. Then I bled into my brain. The blood vessels were too fragile. One ruptured. Blood pooled fast, pressing parts of my brain against my skull. The surgeons told Mom I had a 50-50 chance to live, But if I did, I'd definitely be disabled. When we argue, Henry likes to speculate. Maybe if I hadn't survived, Dad would have stayed. Maybe one healthy kid would have been manageable. Maybe he could have handled that. But I always remind him, Dad ran for the border the day we were born, a full week before my brain hemorrhage. He bolted from the delivery room the second he saw us. His grape-colored, breathless, miniature sons. That said, cerebral palsy and deafness aren't the worst hands I could have been dealt. So what if my ears don't work? So what if my muscles aren't perfect? That's just how it is. If Henry and I are to blame for Dad leaving, then fine, we'll share that burden. That's what twins do, isn't it? We split the world down the middle, including the ugly parts. Especially the ugly parts. Anyway, last week, for the first time in 15 years, I heard something. I heard them digging through the earth, tunneling upward, ready to hollow us out. 48 hours before they arrived, I jolted awake. There was a strange pressure in my skull, a throbbing behind my temples. Terror seized my chest. I scrambled out of bed, strapped on my arm braces, and pounded on Grandpa's door. Mom would wake at the slightest noise, but Grandpa slept like the dead. The drive to the ER was agony. I had no idea what was happening inside my head. I thought my brain was bleeding again. That cursed vessel was finally finishing what it started. Henry grumbled in the waiting room for hours because Mom wouldn't let him stay home alone. He was convinced it was all in my head. He kept signing and saying, "It's just another Felix freak out." He didn't just whisper it, he made sure I saw it. He twisted the knife on purpose. And it hurt even more when it started looking like he was right. My exam showed nothing wrong. Blood work was fine. The CT scan found no blood in my brain. The doctor's best guess? A bad sinus infection. Look, I don't blame her. She was kind and tried her best. The idea that a deaf person might suddenly start hearing again would have seemed absurd. And I wasn't much help. I'd never experienced sound. I knew words like screech, thud, buzz, but they were just labels, like knowing a celebrity's name without ever seeing their face. I imagined sound as giant, invisible fingertips. A loud noise might feel like touching a hot stove, a soft sound like silk sheets, and this sound, the throbbing in my head, it felt like the time I found a cockroach in my sweater last year. It leapt onto my cheek, skittered down my neck, and vanished. Chaotic, unpredictable, hungry, just like a roach. 10 hours before they came, Henry shoveled roast beef into his mouth and started complaining to Mom. He spoke and chewed at the same time, making it hard to read his lips. He loved pretending he forgot I needed to see his mouth clearly. I didn't catch everything he said, but I got enough. Why coddle him? You'll care for him forever. Not my problem. Mom signed sharply. If you're going to talk about him in front of him, you better tell him what you're saying, Henry. One of her fake nails flew off as she signed respect. Shame coiled in my gut. I looked at Grandpa. He was fumbling with his fork, missing his plate entirely. Mom caught me glancing at him for comfort. Sometimes it felt like she couldn't stop watching me, even when she wanted to. "Phil?" she asked. "Ha!" he mumbled, still focused on his food. "Your glasses." Grandpa frowned, then lit up in recognition. His thick-rimmed glasses were hanging on a chain around his neck. He patted his chest, found them, and slid them on. His face broke into a warm smile. He could finally see us. "How was your day, Grandpa?" I signed. "Great. Beautiful afternoon for delivering mail." Between us, Miss Hudson's sweet on me. "Don't tell her husband." He winked and mimed flicking ash from imaginary cigarettes. I smiled weakly. Henry just scowled, stabbing his potatoes aggressively. Grandpa had been retired for years. Age had stolen his memory. Clear one moment, foggy the next. But his body was still strong. On good days, that gave me comfort. On bad days, it felt cruel, like a perfectly tuned car with no driver. I was grateful his sign language was still sharp, but I dreaded the day that too would fade. As I lifted a forkful of broccoli, my hand, steady seconds before, started shaking violently. The pressure in my head had been building all day, faster and heavier. I scanned the table. No one else noticed. All the tests said I was fine. It had to be my sinuses, but I couldn't convince myself. Mom sensed my panic. You okay? Headache. I gave a weak thumbs up. How could I burden her more? She'd sacrificed enough for me already. Henry signed. See? He's fine. He's strong. I fought a smile. When I looked back at my plate, Grandpa wasn't eating. He was staring at the floor, glasses dangling into his shirt. He muttered nonsense. Dirty little squishing around tangled, disgusting, tiny tangled strings. But I clearly heard the last thing he said before falling silent. I see you. 30 seconds before they arrived, we were driving through town when the pressure in my head burst, like popping a swollen pimple. Sharp pain, then instant relief. I turned to Henry. He was pressed against the window, jaw clenched, shoulders tense. Apparently, I was grinning like an idiot because he shot me a mocking look, sticking out his tongue and crossing his eyes. He'd have flipped me off if Mom weren't there. He was furious. We were an hour late to his soccer game. Getting Grandpa and me ready always took forever, meds, gear, slow movements. But that morning, I wasn't the problem. Grandpa was acting strange. Vacant, muttering, glasses missing. Not his usual dementia haze, this felt like his soul had left his body. Our car jerked to a stop at a red light. I brainstormed ways to help Henry. Maybe bring him water, or let him blame me for being late. The light turned green. We lurched forward. Then bam, we stopped so hard, old coffee cups exploded, drenching the dash. My seatbelt dug into my chest. We were at the end of a narrow one-way street, wedged between brick buildings. The front tire was stuck in a deep hole. Mom signed, "Stay," and got out to check. My heart hammered. Henry grabbed my hand, rubbing slow circles on my wrist, grounding me. Outside, Mom peered under the hood. She signed, "Pothole or sinkhole? Very deep. Stay." Calling police. My breath turned shallow. Adrenaline surged. The pressure returned, but different. When we were kids, before Henry grew to resent me, we loved the arcade. We'd hunt for quarters, then celebrate by shaking fistfuls of coins like maracas. This pressure felt like that rapid clink, 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 but coming from everywhere at once. Grandpa suddenly jumped out of the car onto the sidewalk. He spun in circles, swatting at empty air, drool dripping, shouting one word over and over, "Worms! Worms! Worms!" Henry dug his nails into my arm. Mom dropped her phone, frozen in shock, torn between the car and Grandpa, who was stumbling toward the busy road, blind without his glasses. Why wasn't she running to him? Henry yanked me toward him. I turned and saw his face, pale as mist, eyes bulging. He wasn't looking at Grandpa. He was staring past me, out the window. The clinking was deafening. I couldn't hear the man silently slamming his limp arms against the glass. Over and over, the window began to crack. I was paralyzed not just by fear, but by fascination. Beneath his skin, thick cords, like spaghetti, rose and fell in chaotic tangles. Expand. Clink. His arm flopped over his shoulder. Retract. Clink. It dropped like a rock and shattered the window. Glass rained over me. The man leaned in until Mom tackled him at the waist. The clinking stopped. Silence. I thrust my head through the broken window. Glass bit my palms, but I didn't feel it. I needed to see Mom. She was kneeling on the sidewalk, dazed but okay. Relief poured out of me. What was left of the man lay before her. He wasn't dead, he was shattered, like a ceramic pot. The impact had split him in two, upper and lower halves, and dozens of smaller pieces littered the ground. He was hollow inside. No organs, no blood, nothing. The worms had eaten him from within. Mom met my eyes and gave a tired, sad smile. She knew staying still bought us time. Her hands rose to sign. His broken body convulsed. The clinking returned louder, angrier. I couldn't see them, but I could hear them closing in on her. Henry reached over me, trying to pull her to safety. I shoved him back. The clinking reached her. Her mouth opened in a scream. They poured into her, hollowing her out until only enough remained to form 6 final signs. Take care of your brother, Felix. Her fingers twisted into unnatural shapes. Her body went limp, then pulsed. Expand. Clink. Retract. Clink. For the first time ever, Henry followed my lead. I pushed him out the far door. He wrapped an arm around me and we ran. I don't know if Grandpa is dead, but I hope he is, because if he's alive, he's either lost and terrified or hollowed out and still walking. For now, we're safe. I guided us out of town, dodging the worms like landmines. They only stop moving right before entering or leaving a host. Otherwise, they're always writhing. That's how I detect them. The whole town is empty. We passed hundreds of tire-sized holes in the ground. I dropped a quarter into one. Henry said he never heard it hit bottom. I think the hollowed people slid down there. I don't know why they woke up after lying dormant underground, but it doesn't matter now. They're here. Here's the paradox. Only the blind can see them. Only the deaf can hear them. Swarm after swarm crawled through streets coated in salt, left over from a snowstorm that never came. They clinked and twisted, but the salt stayed perfectly still. Indirect detection doesn't work. My advice? Cherish your neighbors with disabilities. Don't have any? That's fine. You've got two choices. Gamble that this isn't the start of a global takeover, or grab a screwdriver. Most people have one. A screwdriver should work no matter which theory you believe. Blind or deaf, the choice is yours. And if the broken are the only ones who can survive this, maybe we need to rethink what broken really means. All right, everyone, go call your deaf or blind friend right now. Make sure you're on good terms. Kidding, mostly. Seriously though, that was incredible writing. Massive thanks to Unalloyed St. Trina for another haunting masterpiece. That's all for today. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, it helps a ton. And thank you to my channel members for your support. If you'd like to support further, the link's in the description, but it's totally optional. See you tomorrow. Thanks for watching. Peace.